this is not about, raising money and flipping. This is about building something meaningful, something game-changing that's gonna last, hopefully forever.
Peyman Nilforoush, the hustler. One of the things I like about DMS is meeting other founders, CEOs. Peyman Nilforoush shares another 2 traits with me as an Iranian-born Canadian, although today he lives in the Bay Area. We met a few years ago and connected on social media, and he had just sold his first company, NetShelter, and was about to embark on his next adventure with InPowered. We connected, stayed in touch, and this year when I saw that he would be at DMS again, I wanted to sit down with him to talk about entrepreneurship and immigration, which are 2 of the main themes of my upcoming documentary, Fox in the Hen House. All right, Peyman, thanks for making time. So you're an interesting profile of an entrepreneur because your first company, NetShelter, I think you started in 98, so before .com bursting. 99, oof. Interesting time. Yeah, right. 1 year before the part. Actually, let's start with that. So you see .com, the promises, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, world is changing. A year later, .com bubble burst, NASDAQ burst. What's your state of mind?
My brother Piruz, Piruz. So he is 14. He is coding in my parents' basement. He ends up building websites. One of the websites he builds is for South Park. There's a beautiful .com store. Okay, this thing gets popular, widely popular. It's called SP Downloads, right? And this is before YouTube.
I can see the cease and desist already.
so there's they're putting episodes of the show. And nobody minds because it's actually created this awesome community. He's got a discussion forum. He's creating 3D characters of Eric Cartman and whatnot. This thing gets popular. UGO comes to him and says, listen, we'll pay you 14 grand a month. We'll host. We'll split the ad revenue. And 14-year-old kid. My parents is your brother selling drugs?
Yeah.
How is this guy making 40 grand? So this.
Sorry, how old were you at the time? He's 14. You're how old?
So I'm 5 years older. 19,
okay, you're 19.
Right?
Okay.
So, and I'm literally first year of University of Toronto studying computer engineering. And I'm like, well, what he's doing is far more interesting than what I'm doing. Anyway, so he starts making money, and he came to me with the idea of NetShelter, which is there are many independent websites out there that need to monetize their content, and we have a passion for independent journalism, right? Obviously, born in Iran, not a lot of freedom of press there. We're like, internet is democratizing content. We want to help them, and we're like, okay, well, we have no idea about advertising, but we love content, we love publishers, and we want to help them. So over Christmas '99, we literally, overnight, we come up with the name NetShelter, which is where you shelter the publishers, essentially. We're in charge of selling their ad revenue, and they're in charge of producing great content. And he is out there recruiting publishers. I'm now out there calling on ad agencies and trying to sell banner ads in '99.
So it's a fascinating story. And yeah, South Park, even though they were part of a big media corporation, I think because they relied a lot on satire and parody, when I spoke to them saying, hey, fast forward 15 years, people were making top 10 lists with your scenes, they were like, yeah, but we rely on parody and satire, so we obviously recognize fair use. Right. I think if it would have been around SpongeBob, Nickelodeon, it would have been a very different outcome. Okay, so that's great as an origin story. Now the NASDAQ bursts. Mm-hmm. What is your thinking? This is fine. Long term, we believe in it, or were you like, hey, maybe maybe I should go back to school and you should go get a real job? What was the thinking?
So there was a lot of doing, right? So it's like, the world of advertising, nobody wanted to buy a banner ad in '99, right? After the bubble burst. So our thinking is, well, we believe in this long term, but our cost is high. So this is when our dad, probably, God bless him, he literally came up with this, you guys got to go and return a bunch of servers. You got to. Your cost is just too high, right? And, we argued that. We're like, Dad, what are you talking? You don't know, right? We're building a long-term business. You don't know what you're talking about. We got this. And he's like, guys, you are not going to make it. So, it's one of those moments where you don't listen to your parents, but you actually do, right? And you actually end up doing that. So we did that. So we returned a bunch of servers, bootstrapped the business, right? And you know this, like Canada, there's not a lot of venture capital, right? So
None.
So
There's snow.
yeah. So we bootstrapped it, and it was a grind and a hustle. Like, you know, I'm calling on anybody and everybody, trying to get them to understand there's value in you getting out there and, you know, building your brand online. There's even value of them clicking and going and buying your product. So we hustled and grinded it out until 2004, when Google brought back the credibility to online advertising. And I always say that it all started with direct response. It wasn't a brand advertising medium, right? They started showing that using search, you can sell products. And as that happened, online advertisers started, like, you know, kind of giving that you know, mind share, if you will, to, at the time, banner ads. And this was the time when, you know, I was almost on my last year at the University of Toronto, and we were kind of doing this big negotiation with one of the first online advertisers, Vonage. Everybody remembers
They
Vonage?
funded the whole
funded the whole. So they ultimately, we won a $2 million contract with them, which essentially funded the company.
So you went through a number of cycles, because there was the 2000, then there was also, I know the resurgence started with Google, but also AOL buying advertising.com. There was a lot of, you know, even when AOL came back with Live 8, it was kind of like, wow, this internet exists. But then there was another correction in the late 2007, so you went through that again, and then there was another one in 2011. Then finally 2013, you decide to sell.
Right.
So as an entrepreneur, what switched? Because you've been at it for 14 years. Like, what happened then for you to go, it's time to sell? Because I'm sure you had other offers, you had other conversations.
Well, first of all, the joke with me and Peruz is whenever we're out there trying to kind of build a business, there's a crash happening, right? I mean, so as, you know, our Series A, in fact, we ended up raising money for NetShelter. Our Series A, we are, you know, August of 2008. We're going out there, literally, I've just hired this guy who used to be the CFO of Dell, and he's out there with me raising money, and we're on a plane going to Montreal, trying to close with Roe, and he's like showing me the RIP Good Times article. That I'm like, dude, don't show me that. So anyway, we end up closing that kind of last minute in December of 2008, and kind of moved to the Bay Area. Really, that was our exposure, right, to the kind of the entrepreneurship outside of Toronto. And you know, you're kind of like a big fish in a small pond, and then all of a sudden now you're making that transition. So we started growing the company and expanding and getting, you know, got a head of sales on board, built the revenue team, started kind of like getting the real media dollars. As we started kind of seeing that traction, that's when NetShelter started growing, and Pew started focusing on, you know, that is when we made the fundamental decision that we're going to go in one vertical and we're going to go deep.
What was the one vertical?
Tech.
Okay.
So NetShelter ended up being, ultimately, we signed up, you know, the Ars Technicas or the Mac Rumors, all those kind of nerdy blogs in the tech category, which got us to aggregate reach that was larger than CNET and Ziff Davis in ComScore, which was the holy grail of media buying, which is the reason why ultimately Ziff Davis bought NetShelter, because overnight they became number one.
Roe being one of the 100 or so VCs who turned us down, by the way, which is all good. Okay, so why did you move to San Fran? I mean, it's obvious, but what was that? That's a big decision.
Yeah. You know, a lot of it was entrepreneurship in Toronto and being able to hire talent. So we got to a place where we're like, okay, we need a head of sales that really understands media sales. We need a team. And it can't really be like over the phone. It actually has to be, you know, out there in a field sales team. Where are we going to go, right? And the thinking was, well, New York or San Francisco. And then San Francisco ended up being a place where there's a lot of tech media. The CNET was there, and they had a lot of talent. So we ended up hiring more people in San Francisco than Toronto. So by the time we moved there, we had like a team of 16 people that were already full-time working. So that worked out. But the adjustment of going from a small market in Toronto to a San Francisco, where you now, you know, you're competing for talent. Even back then it was media talent. Now building InPowered is like hardcore tech and AI talent with like Facebook and Google.
expensive.
It's an amazing thing that you gotta like you look at it and you're like, wow, somebody really must love what they're building here to come and work for you and kind of work with you to build the company.
So I want to talk about Empowered before. One question. When you sold to Ziff, I wanted to be an M&A banker when I was studying finance. Then I fell into media. To the extent you can share, was it that Ziff was the obvious fit, likely fit, and it was a start to end more or less, or did you run a process? What was that experience?
We ran a process because we had incoming requests, and you asked why then. We had gone to a place where it was so clear for us that the future of advertising was not going to be banner ads. And we so knew and believed that the future is going to be much more consumer-friendly type of advertising, which we ended up betting it in content and content-based advertising. And because of that, we were ready to make that transition. And so it kind of came at the right time. And, we ran a process, and, they were the one that wanted it the most.
Good for you and good for them. Now, when I look at your LinkedIn, you stayed about a year or two, and then serial entrepreneur. I mean, I wouldn't call it a serial entrepreneur because you did 13 years at your first. Yep. Was it always a plan that you would leave within a timeline, or did you try to stay longer? Because that's a big adjustment for entrepreneurs when they join a new company. Even if you think you're going to stay forever, the reality sets in. What was that like?
So that's what was so unique about this is that they bought NetShelter, and there were people that operated that network, and they were good. So we didn't need to, there was no management, right? So we were able to basically start Empowered, right away and start kind of building the prototype and launching it. So 2014, we're up and running.
Was there ever a desire or discussions to incubate Empowered within the Ziff Davis empire? Or were you like, no, I'm leaving, want to be independent, I'm going to do my own thing?
They wanted the network. And the network was basically what was creating this massive asset for them, right? Being able to be kind of tech number one. We are launching a technology platform for content amplification. Okay. And so it was that kind of was pretty aligned. The challenge was the mindset that you have as an entrepreneur, going from a company of nearly 100 people to a startup, right? Back into like building it from pretty much scratch, right? So we had a technology, but we needed to go out there and actually, build it up. So that was tough. Like the mindset is just different. You know how it is. It's like you grow up all the way, and then you're back to being a teenager again, right?
So when I look at startup success, I look at vision, ambition, persistence, execution, luck, timing, and focus. I didn't include actually hunger and desperation, but we agree that there's hunger and desperation. Mm-hmm. Was it hard to, once you've made a little bit of money, you're successful, you've made the trades, you've sold a company, you're a made man in entrepreneurship speak. Is it hard to start again? Because that scares me. When people say, would you start another business if you sell? I'm like, hell no. Because it's hard. There's a lot of luck and timing. Did you find, did you have the same hunger? Did you work as hard? I mean, you maybe work different. What's that like?
We had this belief, right, that, we've been in this industry from the beginning. Like, we had no traditional background of advertising. We didn't come from print, we didn't come from TV. So our entire experience was digital advertising. And we were part of this whole kind of like mission of making digital advertising work for publishers, for independent journalists, the whole sort of, thing that started in '99. And we wanted to figure it out, right? And Piruz was on the receiving end of a lot of calls from publishers who were like, listen, my CPMs keep going down, I'm not making money, I can't really support this because, hey, and we're like, listen, it's not really us, it's banner advertising, it's not working for anybody. Look at all these public, publishers, they can't survive. So we wanted to, and so we had this belief that advertising fundamentally could work online, and Piruz had sort of come up with this idea of like, what if we completely change the equation instead of kind of interrupting consumers' experience, pushing stuff at them, pop-up banners, what if we actually give them something that is useful to them, right? And they find it like, useful when they're doing research. Like content is like they want to read. So it could fundamentally change that equation. then your click-through rate goes from 0.005% to 5, 10. It becomes about things that they could actually use on their daily lives. So that belief was a big reason. We had something to prove, right? And that was a big push behind kind of launching Empowered, and it was like an unfinished business.
Great story. Okay, so a couple more questions. One is, what is the one thing that you learned in this journey that you wish you would have known, like on day one when you started in '98?
I would say probably the biggest one is venture capital.
How so?
So, it's funny because we went through this big time with NetShelter, and I know you have your own story, but we were this company out of Toronto that Toronto didn't have a VC community. We would get inbounded by Boston private equities, right, and big kind of New York investment firms, and they would all come at us and they take us out for drinks and, hey, this is great, and then you figure out that they actually had a completely different vision for where this is going to go from here than you did, right? And for us, that was such a learning, because you're in a way you're so inexperienced that you're kind of like a kid, right? In a world where this is an investment community that this is what they do for a living. So learning that and understanding that like it's about what you believe is going to make the company successful saves you a lot of time, right? You wouldn't spend your time, right? There's a lot of time you can spend closing deals and doing other things, right? Ultimately, we ended up raising money from 3, I would say, sort of like more of a Series A type investors in Toronto, which was fantastic because they were all about building. They're all about, it's your vision, you're driving, you're building, we're here to kind of fund you and support you. And again, that has its own challenge, right? As the minute that you raise money, you are now creating expectation for an investor that if things are going great, it's fantastic. As if things are not going great, they have to report back to their LPs, right?
The hook is out.
Right, that's right. So it just changes that dynamic, and I feel like it for first-time entrepreneurs, that whole process, you know how it is. A lot of first-time entrepreneurs feel like raising money is success.
Yeah,
right?
Which
is part of it. It's absolutely, it's traction, it's good, but a lot of time we've seen, in our industry, in ad tech, we've seen how many companies, because of the amount of money that they raised, they couldn't actually prove it out, right? They weren't given the time to execute on a plan that could have actually made, billion-dollar companies, right? So, look at the Trade Desk. Yeah, one of many, but, they had the time to execute.
Yeah, it's like the YouTuber who's successful. I'm like, look at the million who are, starving.
Right.
Couple last questions. So, you're Iranian, you Canadian, you're American. Nowadays in the States, you hear a lot of talk about immigration. You see how there's injustice. San Francisco is ground zero for the homeless, and there's a lot of layers here.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts about entrepreneurship, immigration, the disparities between the haves and the have-nots? What is the role of government? What is the role of business? What is the role of entrepreneurship? Just want you to take all that and run with it. What would you?
Well, it's ironic in San Francisco. So when we moved in 2009, right, a lot of sort of the problems that you see right now was much less. The homeless problem, all of that stuff was much less, and frankly, there were a lot less companies that were unicorns. And now all of a sudden you see all these unicorns and all this money that is in the valley, and you see the homeless situation is actually worse. And we think about it from a perspective of like, what could these companies do, right, to help the city? And I know Mark Benioff has been out there, and there's champions, but there is little action, right? And you think about like the new mayor of San Francisco, and she's sort of looking at it and trying to make some moves, but there's nothing tangible that you can point to. And I think that ultimately it comes down to, does the tech community care enough
Does the tech community care? Because I was at Anthony Scaramucci's SALT recently.
Yeah.
And it was a bunch of billionaires and finance people who all of a sudden are like, oh, listen to me. Yes, I exploited the system, capitalized on the system to make a shitload of money. But because I'm afraid of these socialism tendencies, I'm going to now propose like I got the solution. Tech, not to the extent of the financiers, but similarly, they kind of took the tax credits and the tax gains and the loopholes and this and that. And now it's like, because it's coming back in front of their, mansions, symbolically, the homeless are on their, outside, they're trying to seem like they care. Does the tech community really care, or is it paying lip service?
It's like tangible things that could be done, right? Is, for example, lunches. Think about all the lunches and benefits, right? If you're in the Valley, right, every recruiter, every HR department is talking about, creating benefits. And you're thinking about all these employees that you have who are making a lot of money. I mean, we're in the Valley, salaries are high, right? And costs are high too. But could every startup in San Francisco take that, a portion of some of those benefits, lunches, things that are not necessarily doing much, and actually put that in, a pot of money that goes to the city and creates a much healthier, kind of helps the homeless situation, which would in turn make it much safer for the employees, by the way, right? Absolutely, right? I think the question is leadership. Leadership is a big, big problem, right? I mean, if you think about who's leading these initiatives, right? I know that we have a new governor, Gavin Newsom. Happens to live in where I live in Marin, or used to live there. Now he's in Sacramento, but he's got some great ideas, right? So there is definitely some leadership that's coming from his ideas in terms of just dealing with action, right? On taking action on things that haven't been done. So there's leadership coming from him for sure. But I can't really say that at a local level. I think we're still lacking that. And it needs to be drastic. You know what I mean? Like, it really needs to be putting people on spot and putting companies on spot of like, listen, you're in this city, you want the city to be better, you're doing well, make it better. Setting aside the lockup period for Uber shareholders to sell, I think clearly seeing BuzzFeed and Vice valuation challenges and Uber doling out options at a certain price and a lot of those options being underwater, does it have any impact on hiring, recruiting, compensating employees? Because of the IPO that's sort of not gone well. Mm-hmm. Well, I think about it from a standpoint of why is it not going well, and I think from a standpoint of like the expectation that's been set for a self-driving kind of car company and things that are not necessarily there right now. I mean, if you think about it, ultimately you have investors that are looking for growth, and you have Uber that the growth is definitely slowed down, and so then they're looking at profitability, and they kind of try to paint this picture of, is this going to be profitable in the future? And the answer is yes. If it turns into if self-driving cars start being there, then absolutely, right? But if not, then not so much. So I think it's a case by case basis. I don't think it's a blanket, but at the same time, I think you're gonna have a lot of these other companies that are gonna think twice now. Like is Airbnb, all these companies that are kind of on the fence, they're gonna think twice. That's a good thing though. Mm-hmm. I was actually getting a little bit kind of like the .com era of companies that fundamentally
should not be,
because of profitability. You and I know this. Like when the shit hits the fan, what happens is, are you profitable or are you not? And these companies, when you look at there's no way that they can be. But I think in our sector, in the kind of the sort of the MarTech, the ad tech, I actually think there will be more public companies. I know that the Trade Desk has been kind of the gold standard now as a $10 billion company. I think they've done extremely well, but I really see that AI is fundamentally creating a very, very efficient sort of technology landscape for efficiency driven for marketers that wasn't there before. I feel like the ad tech, a lot of ad was there wasn't enough tech.
There wasn't enough tech. Last question. What's the one thing about NetShelter that you'd like to see carry forward with your new company? And what's the one thing that you're like, having learned from my first experience, I want to be different and better?
100% the culture. Right, so with NetShelter, for us, it was a growing as entrepreneurs. Right, hiring the most talented executives are not necessarily the best thing you got to do. Hiring the best executives who are also a cultural fit, who are in it to build what you're trying to build. Right, who are in it because of the vision, because of the values, because of what you're trying to create. That's what it's all about. That's really what we focus on. And it's harder said than done. Like I always say, we have this interview process where you have, let's say, 5 people that are interviewing the candidate, and we sit down almost like a family and have a discussion about the candidate. And it is in that conversation that we're making that decision. And it's not like, hey, we're voting. It's a conversation. And in that conversation, things come up, just like when you're having a conversation like as a family, that you're like, yeah, maybe not. Or we're so excited. This is absolutely, she will fit fantastic here. So to me, I mean, honestly, that's really been the biggest thing that we focus on. I think the second thing has been very mindful of raising capital. In fact, we've literally bootstrapped all the way. And, it makes you a lot more disciplined, right? You focus, and you focus on building what's the most important thing, and everybody else in the company, all the employees, they also, they understand that this is not about raising money and flipping. This is about building something meaningful, something game changing that's gonna last, hopefully forever. Right, so
just because you brought it up,
yeah.
Do you feel that most entrepreneurs today are in a mindset to flip versus building things that last over decades?
I think there is that mindset. I think that the fantasy about entrepreneurship, as you know, which is like whether it's the Silicon Valley show. I mean, it is very different than the reality. Right, the reality of a grind of building a company without any outside capital, going through the ups and downs, the emotional ups and downs, the craziness of just being able to kind of, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, get everybody else continually focused and excited, right? That is never part of, the mindset of some of the new entrepreneurs that are, they come in and they're like, we got to go out there and kind of raise money. And I'm like, I always talk, like, I'm part of C100, which is the Canadian entrepreneurs that are kind of like, help them move to the Valley and raise money in the Valley. And the question is always, raising money is really important for our success. And I'm like, well, why? Right? And pretty quickly you realize it's actually not. Right? What's actually really important is get to that MVP and make sure that you have customer traction and then reference them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to knock people that need to raise, because I was very fortunate to have money from my first venture as a VP of sales and a minority shareholder. But if anything, it's a deficiency in your body as the startup that you need capital. In a historical, when you look at the greatest companies built, it was hustle, finding revenue, finding clients. Yeah. It's just we've created this, I call it, you have entrepreneurs, wantrepreneurs, and venturepreneurs. And those are all very different things. Peyman, it was a pleasure chatting. Fantastic stories.
Likewise, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.